Hi, thank you guys so much for having me here. It's neat to be back in high school, so to speak, and to talk about justice today. Alrighty, so my talk today is a little bit out of the ordinary, and I titled it Justice for All, the Unraveling of a Charity's Feel-Good Story About Saving African Orphans. And this is the title of the Wall Street Journal that came out on the front page, which surprised us all when we got the newspaper. And it came out in early August 5th, 2024. And this was kind of our story of our pursuit to adopt our son and the red flags that we uncovered along our journey. And this case really taught me a lot, but also affirmed a lot of the principles of justice that I had tried to live my life by prior to. And I hope that it means something for you guys today. So I want to direct your attention to the picture there of Lacey Carney, Jason Carney's wife, in the helicopter, because I'm going to come back to that soon. But what I really want to do is take a brief second to just show you who I am and my family. I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old Malawian son who we adopted last year through a different adoption agency. And he's kind of the reason that I am here today. He was an instrumental part of our story, and our pursuit to adopt him brought us through some challenges that we had to overcome. So human trafficking is something that most of you are already familiar with, but when we think of human trafficking, we can think of it as kind of existing in a vacuum, as something that doesn't happen very often or doesn't happen close to home. But the reality is, it's such a huge issue. It's only surpassed by the criminal drug trade right now, and it's the new modern slavery. There's 49.6 million people in modern slavery worldwide, and 12 million of them are children. So as I look around at all of you today, it's amazing and a blessing that we're here to be able to talk about these concepts and to thrive in the environments that we're in. But there's so many kids who aren't given that same privilege, and it's up to us to kind of be the voice to advocate for them. It's a $150 billion industry, so if that gives you kind of an idea about how profitable this is, it sheds light to where the motives are for the traffickers that profit off of the commoditization of humans. When I talk about trafficking today, I'm mainly referring to adoption trafficking, which is orphan trafficking, and it's the same concept of selling a human for profit. And so in international adoption, if you're not familiar with it, a prospective adoptive parent spends anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000 to adopt, which is a wildly expensive endeavor. And all of our reasons for adopting are different, and so every individual will have a different motivation for adopting, but the cost is pretty insurmountable. So our old adoption agency, the one that I'm discussing today, was called Children of All Nations. And when you look at some of their tax records, just to give you an idea of the profitability of adoption, they have about 25 million in net resources year over year. So although adoption agencies function as a nonprofit, they're really ripe for exploitation in making money off of the very children we're trying to protect. So unscrupulous individuals can exploit orphan children for personal financial gain. And this is where my story comes into play. Children of All Nations, our adoption agency, employed a foreign service provider. And the foreign service provider is a man named Jason Carney who owns a nonprofit called Second Milk. And the nonprofit is very well known. It has really big name donors, big movie directors, politicians, celebrities, MLB players attached to it. So this nonprofit on the surface is so reputable, or so it seems. So this nonprofit owner, Jason Carney, was our adoption agency's foreign service provider. And without getting on the weeds of what that looked like, the foreign service provider is basically the boots on the ground in Malawi, somebody who owns the nonprofit in the United States, but works in Malawi to liaison with the adoptions, to help get paperwork where it needs to go, to help get child matches into the social welfare system, to be matched with families in the US. So when I talk about the foreign service provider, this is really somebody that the adoption agency employs to actually facilitate the adoptions. So this gives you a little bit of clarity on how Jason and the adoption agency work together. And this email that's up on the screen is the first email that I got when I kind of dove into the fire of this human trafficking world, so to speak. So I had a friend return from Malawi attempting to adopt her children there, and she came home with some red flags. And I had a background in investigative work, working for Weld County Human Services, doing welfare fraud investigations for a while. And so when she brought back these concerns, even though my heart wanted to say, nope, this is not true, you're with a good adoption agency, you're gonna be fine, my gut said, I need to listen to her concerns, and not only do I need to listen to them, but I need to help her substantiate them. So I spent quite a deal of my time diving into sort of the nitty-gritty of pulling financial records, using a lot of the databases I was trained to use while working as an investigator. And what I turned up was very problematic. So in August of 2022, I penned a letter to the IAME, which is the Accrediting Board for Adoption Agencies. All adoption agencies have to abide by what's called Hague Policy, and Hague Policy is the accreditation that allows them to operate in other countries. So I penned a letter to the IAME, and I sent this letter on August 18th, 2022, and I posted a copy of it to our adoptions kind of family webpage. And I did that because I knew that I was about to be silenced and I was about to be gaslit, and I wanted as many people as possible to see the letter and my concerns so that they had at least a stab at transparency in knowing what their adoption agency was up to. So what jumps out in my mind when I got this email was the, not to sound rude, but the page isn't a place to post stuff like that. I just hope and pray there isn't still a group of people trying to hurt the Malawi program. Hopefully we have a group praying for these kids and they're matched quickly for the sake of the children. So when we talk about justice, although we tend to think in our minds that it's a very heroic pursuit, I want to just highlight that pursuing justice often comes with a lot of pushback. It comes with oftentimes fear for our reputation, even fear for our physical safety. And so when I got that email, I knew instantaneously that I was about to embark on a very tumultuous journey. So I pushed and pushed and pushed for about 2 months to get the agency to listen to my concerns and investigate the foreign service provider. And it became very clear to me that not only were they uninterested in my concerns, but that they were actually aiding the foreign service provider in his crime. And so the way the trafficking comes into play is that we realized very quickly that what Jason was doing is actually going into villages and paying families for relinquishment of their children. So what that looks like is him going into a village where Malawians are already very, very impoverished, living on less than $1 a day, and offering them a great sum of money to give up their child so that the child can be put into the adoption system and adopted to a family in the United States, which generates the adoption agency and the foreign service provider quite a deal of money. It's pretty unimaginable that this would occur, but for Malawians that live on less than $1 a day, sometimes giving up a child for adoption and getting a large sum of money is the only way to feed the remaining children that they have that they're unable to care for. So there's a group of individuals that are very prone to exploitation, and then there's very large agencies that exploit these groups of people for financial gain. So our breakthrough came in October 2022 when I got an email from the Department of State. And when I opened this email, my heart basically dropped, and I was quick to reply to Jonathan Barrehill, who's a special agent with the Diplomatic Security Service in the United States, and I was quick to reply to him and say, yes, thank you for hearing my concerns. I'd love to talk with you. Let's schedule a time. And our first meeting was about 4 hours long, where I was able to share all of my concerns, recorded phone calls, documents that I had obtained, witness testimonies, financial records, etc. And this kicked off a very large-scale Department of State investigation into not only human trafficking, but nonprofit embezzlement as well. So if you're not familiar with embezzlement, which I truthfully hope many of you are not, but embezzlement is basically this nonprofit obtaining donor funds and misusing them in ways that are illegal and unethical. And so as the investigation kicked off and continued on, it gained momentum and it gained speed and it gained credibility. And the Department of State executed a search warrant in the fall of last year. And in that search warrant that became public record, some of this insight into the investigation happenings became public record. So when they started looking into the financial statements, they started to see that Jason was spending money on a helicopter tour in Las Vegas. Remember that initial picture I told you to pay attention to? They were using donor funds for safaris in Africa, for round-trip first-class airfare to Cancun, for personal expenditures, for utility bills. It goes on and on. And why this is important is because the nonprofit brought in close to $1 million a year, and we have evidence that of that $1 million, only $6,000 actually went to Malawians. So if you think about what big discrepancy that is and how big of a nonprofit that is, it's very egregious. And the mission of the nonprofit was truly to feed malnourished orphans. In Malawi, when a child has a mom pass away, the mom is typically nursing the baby prior to passing away. So when a mother is deceased, which is very common due to HIV and malaria and general poverty, when a mother passes away, the family's unable to provide formula for the baby because formula is expensive and most people live on less than $1 a day. So when we look at the amount brought into this organization and what big impact they could have had should the funds have been dispersed appropriately, it's very like heartbreaking to think about where the funds actually went. And there was one specific case that still touches my heart today, but an employee for Second Milk said, hey, we got an email that we didn't collect enough donor funds for this month, so we had to remove children from the formula program. And sometimes when children were removed from the formula program, they passed away from malnourishment. So we had children in this issue that actually did pass away from what was occurring with the nonprofit fraud. Slowly, the reputation of Second Milk became very public. Charity Navigator, which is a very big trust website for NGOs and other 501c3s, started to publish, okay, proceed with caution with this nonprofit, and various news articles started to be published in Malawi and in the United States. And so why I'm here to talk about this story today is that there's this concept of justice for all that I think is really beautifully woven into this particular case. If we focus on justice just being an arm of the criminal justice system, then really all we're talking about is Jason Carney, the subject of the Department of State investigation, versus the United States of America. And the reality is that there are so many perpetrators and so many victims that were a part of this case, and such a ripple effect in one bad nonprofit that carried into so many different avenues. So when we think about the perpetrators, those were the people that were involved, kind of the bad guys involved in committing these crimes. We have obviously Children of All Nations, the adoption agency, and Second Milk, with Jason being the owner. But we also have people that we wouldn't have thought about as perpetrators. We have the board members who had fiduciary oversight, meaning the people who were on the board who had access to some of the financials and the internal workings that should have seen red flags and did not say anything. We have Malawian social workers who at times accepted bribes in order to get false paperwork for these children to get them adopted into the United States. We have major donors and celebrities who started to see the red flags but still continued to lend support to Jason for reasons unbeknownst to us. We have adoptive families who were willing to overlook the red flags at times. And there was one particular case where the Wall Street Journal talks about a little girl named Maya who was adopted. And when Maya's parents traveled to Malawi to adopt Maya, the grandmother who didn't want Maya to be adopted actually took Maya out of the adoptive mom's arms, and the adoptive mom quickly snatched her back, and they ran into a car, they jumped in the car, and they got out of the courthouse. And so it's a very clear example of an adoptive mom who knew that there were red flags and biological family members willing to care for the child they wanted to adopt, but were willing to overlook those red flags for the sake of completing their adoption. So we also have the mission field workers who traveled with Jason and Second Milk and really utilized these opportunities as kind of personal advancements. There was a lot of Instagram photos posted of, look at the work I'm doing, alongside these African children. Look at the safari trips we took, kind of using it as like vacation and tourism, with no real intention to impact the world for good. And when we talk about the victims are also multifaceted. We have children who were adopted under unethical circumstances, families who invested time, money, and dreams into making their adoption happen, donors who gave their hard-earned dollars to support this organization that they thought was working for good. One particular instance stands out where a little girl ran a lemonade stand for a few years, and she took every dime of that lemonade stand and she donated it to Second Milk. And in her mind, she was donating this hard-earned entrepreneurial money to support feeding malnourished infants, when in reality, it was paying for lavish trips and vacations and homes, etc. So that was so impactful. There were Malawian children who passed away from starvation under the Second Milk program, lawmakers and celebs who were associated with Second Milk who have now had their reputations tarnished. I remember getting a call from Tim Tebow's manager, Dina, when Tim Tebow was supposed to speak at Jason's gala. And she said, I'm starting to get messages on social media that I should be aware of this nonprofit. Tebow runs on a very large anti-trafficking platform, and your name was brought up, so I wanted to call you and see if you had any concerns you'd like to share. So I was able to tell Dina a little bit about our story, how we were working with the Department of State, and she's somebody who trusted me and trusted in what we were saying even before the Department of State documents became readily available, and Tim Tebow backed out of that gala. And when this became public, she called me and said, thanks so much for being willing to talk about this. Because of you, we were able to have him back out of a gala so he wasn't associated with a really unethical nonprofit. We have biological families who have been ridiculed and cast out of their villages for involvement in placing a child up for adoption. And we have innocent Malawians who have been impacted because they were working for Second Milk in an attempt to get the money to feed their families, and who have been kind of presented with this crisis moving forward of their involvement. So when we talk about justice, how do we pursue justice after a case like this? And I really think about justice from the perspective of we have to have humility. We have to fight against the bystander effect. So oftentimes, things go unchecked because we're thinking that somebody else is going to handle it on our behalf. Somebody else witnessed the crime. Somebody else saw this happen, so they'll be the ones to report it. But in this case in particular, we found that that didn't happen. This was allowed to go on for about a decade, and as witnesses stepped forward, one common theme that we heard from them was, well, we saw what was going on, but we assumed that it would be brought to the attention of law enforcement because a lot of people had the same experience. And it took about a decade for a group of us to step up and say, this is totally unethical and somebody has to do something about it. So we can't stay silent in the face of injustice because we expect others to intervene on our behalf. And we have to recognize that the legal system is one arm in the body of justice. And what I've learned firsthand is that the justice system often moves very, very slow. Again, this case has been going on since 2022, and we're nearing an indictment, but we're not there yet. So it's been over a couple of years and we still haven't reached the point where the case has gone to trial. So we have to realize that us as human beings, being interconnected in our humanity, really have an opportunity for impact to step up and bridge the gap where the justice system cannot. So how do we advocate for justice? We have to have compassion with the victims and with all humans. We have to listen and validate others' experiences, even when it's very inconvenient for us. I didn't want to hear a lot of these stories because it meant that I had to walk away from about $20,000 that we had already invested in our adoption. It was inconvenient. It cost us. It cost us time and money, and we have to do what's right even no matter the cost to us. We have to get involved in things that match our skills and interests, and we have to give what we can where we can, and that doesn't always mean financially, but if we have skills and efforts, time and creativity and resources, there's a lot that we can do on a grassroots level to stand up for things that make a difference in our world. So I'll close you guys off with a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., which I don't think needs any addition. It's very self-explanatory and so profound. But injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So I hope that by being here today in a very short talk, I can give you a little glimpse of something that we were a part of. And hopefully it inspires you guys to think about the ways that you can step up and raise concerns when you have concerns and really fight to be the voice of those that might not be able to speak on their own behalf. Thank you guys so much.